supportive the parish council here were, so I just wanted to make that effort to come over really, and because it's an awesome thing to see some villages coming together to do this kind of thing. So yeah, I'll just talk through kind of what we do, why we do what we do, what happens to some of the materials, the kind of the compromises we're making, if you like, because I guess, and you know, a lot of where we get our success from isn't from a few people doing things perfectly, it's from lots and lots of people doing it pretty well, and us creating a system which makes that the easier choice than not doing it well. So there are definitely compromises and trade-offs, and money is obviously always a factor. But because there aren't many of us, just stick your hand up and just take questions as we go through, rather than kind of making it really formal, if that's all right. So yeah, Somerset Waste Partnership, so we're just very quickly, we are kind of part of the local authority family, so accountable at the moment to a board made up of 2 members, so two from Mendip, 2 from all the other districts and 2 from county. Obviously all of that drops away come next year when we're just part of the new Somerset Council, the new unitary. And yeah, and it's kind of, I've been there, I don't even know anymore, 4 or 5 years, something like that. I kind of lost count when COVID happened and the world went weird. But yeah, before me, very much a history of innovation. So pretty much the first to publish an end use register. I'll come back to explain what I mean by that. The first to roll out food waste at scale. So when you go around the country and you see lots of other places have their food caddies in brown bins, that's because someone in Somerset made the random decision to put it in a brown bin many years ago. And that's how some things work in the world, isn't it? But yeah, and obviously more recently we've rolled out Recycle More. So over on the kind of stand, I've got our recycling tracker. So the big one shows a recycling rate of about 52%, because that was 2020-21, so before we rolled out Recycle More. And if I'm honest, we'd stagnated about that level for quite a while. Last year, 21-22, that jumped up to 56%, and that's as we saw kind of part of the county doing Recycle More with the extra materials. And then yeah, we're not confident yet because we haven't seen a full year, but the first quarter of this year jumped up again to 59%. So really pleased with that, but just obviously want to see that sustain over the rest of the year. But that's the first quarter when the whole county's been on Recycle More. So really good, but recycling rate, it's a good headline, but it's a pretty rubbish measure because it's just looking at weight, it's not looking at carbon. So historically, we've been in the top 20%, I'd say, in the country for recycling rate. We've pretty much always been in the top 10% for carbon saving. And that's because of that kind of focus on curbside sort, because the focus on the kind of carbon intensity. So you'll see lots of campaigns like Slim My Waste, Feed My Face going after food waste, more and more food waste, because actually hugely carbon intensive. Hence Recycle More, focus on plastics. Super lightweight, therefore really hard to construct a viable business case, if you like, to pick up something that's really bulky, driving air around basically. But obviously very significant carbon impact. So that's why we've always differed in terms of carbon impact versus recycling. The 2 most carbon intensive things left in people's bins at the moment are food and textiles. So I think, you know, next year our plan is to have even more of a focus on food, but reflecting the cost of living crisis, so really targeting that food reduction end of it rather than recycling it once you've wasted it, if you like. Obviously, I'd just much rather there wasn't as much food there in the first place. The other one is textiles. Textiles is a really tricky one because again, we talk about what we do as being the end of the pipe. We're just dealing with the consumption decisions, the production decisions, all those kind of things. Textiles, fast fashion, you know, that needs tackling for me. I'm not saying we can't do things and we can't do things better, but it needs tackling at that end, if you like, rather than just dealing with it once it's become waste. The other statistic I guess we started highlighting a lot more in the last couple of years is how much stays in the UK. And I guess, you know, we've all seen the horrible scare stories and the pictures of stuff dumped on a beach. Do you know what I mean? The kind of classic thing you'll see on any of the news programmes whenever waste or recycling is talked about. And if you look at those, or if you kind of try and conjure one of those images in your head, what you're always seeing is a whole mess, isn't it? Plastic, little soft plastic wrapper of this, bit of card there. It's completely mixed, and I think that's what the way we do things in Somerset is that protects us from, because we ask you to do a lot of the hard work, quite frankly, by separating as much as possible. That means that people in the UK, reprocessors, actually want our material. We get a decent price for it. You know, we probably make about 3 million compared to the 50 million the service cost. So it doesn't cover the cost of the service. But the important thing is we're creating a commodity that the people who are going to reprocess it, turn it back into a cardboard box, turn it back into a glass bottle or a plastic bottle. They actually want it, and they're paying a premium for it. So yeah, last couple of years we've been about just over 97%. Staying in the UK, about 50% overall staying in Somerset, mostly the food and garden, some of those heavy things that would be nonsense to transport very far. And yeah, just under 3% going overseas. I think last year 99.4% of plastic stayed in the UK, so I think plastic going overseas is one of the things people are really worried about. Again, the way we collect it and treat it maximises the chances of it staying in the UK. Question?
Can I go back to the textiles?
Yes.
So presumably you get synthetics and natural fibres. Do you separate them? What do you do with them?
We don't. So we used to collect more textiles and shoes than we do at the moment, and they were eventually go in two directions. The stuff that could be reused went off to companies that kind of specialised in that. They'd sift it, they'd grade it. Quite a lot would go out to different countries around the world for resale. So that's one market. The other market was the stuff that was no one would wear again. Yeah. That would go into be made into industrial rags. That industrial rag market about two and a half years ago effectively disappeared. So that's when we stopped collecting. We said we only want stuff you can wear again, use again, because the last thing we want to do is ask people to go to the effort of recycling it or giving it to us if we know we can't do the right thing with it. The market for reusable clothes, like what clothes you could wear again, changed as well. So lots of countries, and quite rightly, introduced kind of anti-dumping legislation, if you like, in terms of they didn't want cheap second-hand clothes from the developed world damaging their domestic market. So it's changed quite a lot. So hence what we do is we encourage people to just take it to a charity. You know, if it's wearable again, take it to a charity shop. And the sad reality at the moment is, if it can't be worn again, the best place for it is the black bin. I hope that will change. It's something we're keeping on looking at, but until we know there's a sustainable market there, because you don't want, you start saying, oh yeah, this month you can, next month you can't. People just lose trust and confidence in the system. So yeah.
But you're right to say actually the issue is at the top end in the retail area. Actually, and all of us thinking.
And there's lots of changes, isn't there? You'd see in some newspapers they now do a thing where it's like, oh, this is your thrift option. There's loads of websites that now are almost making much more of a, it's a different world in terms of second-hand clothes than it was, say, 5 years ago, but it's got a long way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Very interesting. Coming back to your going abroad,
yes.
Why does any material go abroad?
Because there's only so much capacity in the UK, so we produce anything for reprocessing material. So say the plastic you give us, the amount of plastic that is collected across the UK vastly dwarfs the infrastructure built in the UK to deal with plastic. So they can pick and choose the best quality material. There's then a whole load of infrastructure in Europe, and then there's other stuff in the third world, in other parts of the world, sorry. But yeah, so they're picking and choosing, and generally the UK processes, be it a paper remanufacturer, be it the glass industry that's melting down glass, and they want the quality stuff, which is why we focus on quality, because it's the best protection against the wrong thing happening to our waste, if you like. So
when it goes abroad for processing, not for landfill.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we don't send any.
No rubbish goes. And I'll come on to what we do with our rubbish at the moment. I'm just talking about your recycling.
Okay.
So again,
it is more capacity.
And exactly. In the last 2 years, apart from year before last, I think 0.6% of plastic, our plastic went overseas. This year it's mostly been the paper and card. So at Christmas time you'll hear us and hopefully see the staff at a recycling centre banging on about don't buy glittery wrapping paper that's actually got some metal and plastic in it, because that's the kind of, when you've got that mixed in with a load, that's where the companies will look at it and go, no thank you. It's also why we're kind of grumpy on things like medical blister packs, because actually most materials, like we squish it and bale it and they'll inspect it, and and they can reject it basically if there's too much contamination. They'll have different thresholds and they change over time. But there are some things like medical blister packs. If there's one of them and they see it on the edge of the bale, they'll reject the whole thing and it will go to landfill. So again, because of the legislation.
You mentioned soft plastic.
Yes.
So at the moment we don't have curbside collection for that, but there are quite a few supermarkets around here who offer services for that. So are there plans to put this into the normal household collection?
So that's one of those ones where everything's got to work in together. There's no point collecting it until you've got the infrastructure to deal with it. So I know there have been some horror stories about some of the stuff being collected by supermarkets going overseas. Again, it's because we haven't got the infrastructure in the UK. At the end of the day, we are, whatever people's views on it are, we're kind of a market economy. We won't build that infrastructure until those companies know that there's a supply and there's a demand. So national government have said that by 2027, everybody has to collect soft plastics. There's a trial that's about to start. We didn't want to go in the very first wave of it because we thought, well, because it was the first wave of it was supposed to happen when we were doing our last bit of rollout of Recycle More, and we just thought that's too much. But we're working on lobbying really hard to get us included in one of those trials. It will start really small, like a couple of thousand properties, but the idea is then if we're in that, it will gradually scale up and we'll be ahead of the curve in terms of 2027. So trying to get it as early as possible, but the reality is, again, getting in the plastic pots, tubs and trays is a hard one to stack up financially in difficult times. Getting in those, it's only going to work unless we get some money from industry. So some of you might have heard about extended producer responsibility. So that's the idea that actually, rather than all of us as taxpayers paying for dealing with all this recycling, the people making the decisions on what to put a product in should bear the costs. The idea of that is, well, they're the ones that make the decision. They decide whether to put it in something which is hard stroke impossible to recycle stroke or really easy to recycle. So the idea is, so that should be coming in, unless, God knows, but it should be coming in, I think, in 2024 and then phased in, so that then actually they pay a higher fee if it's deemed to be non-recyclable packaging and a lower fee if it's deemed to be recyclable. Interestingly, so-called compostable packaging will be classified and will have to have not recyclable on it. So, there's a fair bit of greenwash around, and I'm no chemist, but yeah, we can touch on that. But some of the other things that then come in with that is actually standardised labelling to really clearly say it's recyclable, it's not recyclable. We're waiting for we've been waiting for about a year for the rest of the legislative package to come together to understand what that means. But crucially for us, it's got to mean some money from industry to enable us to do this. Otherwise, with the best will in the world, we can't. But yeah, we are working hard. It's big priority for us to get that's the next kind of curbside material we want to get in there.
Just to follow up then, since you mentioned legislation, how has the framework of your work changed since Brexit? Because I know quite a lot about what was the European framework for waste management before Brexit. So is there now equivalent and better legislation in the UK?
Not yet. So I think EPR was, it's happening around Europe. There's a British variant of it, so that's the one there's certainty on. What we haven't got legislative certainty on is the kind of consistency of collection or any idea on deposit return schemes. So there's a bit of a hole there in terms of certainty, but yeah, by and large, the stuff that got published in the Waste and Resources Strategy that relates to us was pretty much following the same pathway that Europe was following. I know it's presented as something different, but yeah. And I was wary of those comparisons when we look at other European countries, because they come from a different place. It's like the reality is, if we try to do, say, what France does, we go to a village in France, a nice little communal recycling place where everybody in the village takes their recycling to. That's really cheap to do. Reality is, people in Britain don't behave like that. Again, you go to Germany, they've got a deposit return system that works really well. But they put that in before they had curbside infrastructure. If we do it in this country, well, we've already spent billions as a country doing that. We'll spend another couple of billions doing that so it's worth looking abroad, but it's also always worth bringing it back to this country, I think, and where we are.
probably related to the regulatory question. You've mentioned that we're performing very well in Somerset because of the curbside segregation.
Yeah.
And you were saying other areas in the UK aren't doing as well. Are there any barriers to them achieving the same level of segregation of the waste? And is it partly because the regulation isn't as comprehensive in the country that would direct them to achieve similar levels as we've got in Somerset?
Yeah, so if you look at Wales, there's a Welsh system. Wales is pretty much top of the international league these days for recycling. They came to Somerset long before my time to look at, when they were looking around, and that's why if you go to Wales, you're like, well, it looks quite a lot like what we do in Somerset. Well, they've got very consistent national guidance, and the money following that guidance, and that has brought everybody with them. We haven't had that system, so you do get quite a lot of divergence across England in terms of how places do recycling. There are good reasons for that. So if we were sitting in the middle of London now, you would be mad to do a curbside sort system. There just isn't a space. Your priorities are different, your architecture is different, your demography is different, and all of these are factors, and kind of that's starting to be recognised. The Resources and Waste Strategy nationally did recognise that curbside sort is the best environmental way of doing it, and SWP were held up as an example in that. But I think they've started to recognise that, yeah, it's the best, and they say they will bring in a process where every area will have to justify if they're not doing that, why they're not doing it, because there are legitimate ones. And there are just fear factors, aren't there? It's a very political, very emotive topic. So some people, if now you've got food waste, it feels like bizarre that you wouldn't, but you go to a place that hasn't done any food waste recycling and they're terrified by the idea. You go to a place that still has a weekly refuse pickup from black bags, mind boggles given the health and safety risk of asking loads of people to chuck them in all the time. But anyway, the idea of even moving to a fortnightly refuse, they'd be like, oh, it's beyond their comprehension. But we haven't had the national steer, so there should be some legislation coming out around consistent collections. There's good things in that. It should mean, you might have some different systems, but actually pretty much the materials you can recycle everywhere, once you've allowed a few years for these systems to kind of come together, should be the same everywhere. Should make everybody do food waste collection. There are a couple of things that I would disagree with. So they say they would make garden waste free. I think that's madness. Completely against that producer responsibility idea. Why would we make somebody in a flat subsidise somebody with a massive garden who's got the option of taking it for free to a recycling centre or composting it in their garden? Why would we? Anyway, but that's and obviously I don't know if there were times under Eric Pickles when they tried to throw money at local authorities to make people move back to weekly rubbish. No one took it because it was madness. It doesn't make financial or environmental sense. There's a risk they make it harder for other local authorities to do what we've done. But I was speaking to the National Audit Office a couple of days ago, and they wanted to learn more about what we're doing. There are about 20 authorities doing 3 or 4 weekly refuse now, and all of them are showing exactly what we're showing. Huge jump in the amount of recycling, because you need the stick as well as the carrot.
Can I just mention, you mentioned Wales.
Yeah.
As it happens, my daughter lives in Swansea, and she's a bit of a recycling whiz, to the point where she's got about £20,000 for charity by doing what she does. And all she collects, and we have to save it to take to her when we go over, are things like bread packets and all sorts of bits and pieces. And it just seems to me, and it used to be Tassimos, but I think they've no longer taken them, and loads of other things, and it just seems to me that if she can do it and make that sort of money for charity, why can't we do the same? Yeah,
it can be done. It can be done. Again, it's about compromise. So if we were just to say, oh yeah, we'll collect those soft plastics, we'll stick it in with the blue bag. Well, there's now a couple of completely different types of plastic that need extracting out. When we've done trials in Taunton quite a few years ago, when other places have done trials, the reality is there are people who behave brilliantly and there's people who don't. And so actually what you'd then be doing is contaminating it. So when we roll it out, it will probably have to be kept separate. So then you get into all the thinking about how do you make that work for people. So it's those compromises, and most people are not you. Do you know what I mean? We've got to cater for everybody in this county to make it work.
So there's a lot of interest in things like bread packets you could now take back to Tesco and have a place for you to collect.
Exactly. But again, you know, you're taking it back to Tesco, they're using their reverse logistics or something to take that away, and they're doing it because they realise they've got an environmental problem, because they're the ones partly in that system creating that waste in the first place. We're driving people at the trucks around to go and pick it up, you know, so the costs there are quite different. Glass, it's worth dwelling on glass. So you will see some areas that will have a higher headline recycling rate, but will do way worse on carbon. And glass is almost the easiest way to explain that. So we don't care about colour anymore because the industry doesn't care about colour. They've got the kit to sort it out. What the industry cares about is having glass either whole or in big chunks, because that's what enables them to remelt it and turn it back into a glass bottle, which is what happens to the vast majority of our glass. If you're sticking all that glass in with everything else, it's going off to a factory, if you like, sort of a MRF, a materials reprocessing facility, where they're having to separate that all out. The glass comes out as ground up glass, still counts as a ton of recycling. That basically gets used as aggregate, so your carbon benefit there is zero. So you still counts with the same recycling rate, counts absolutely zero in terms of carbon. So I think that for me is the kind of easiest way of thinking that big difference between the environmentally benefit you get from asking everybody to put that effort in to sort stuff versus, you know, what lots of people perceive as easier in terms of putting everything in one bin. And sorry, just one final point on that. And when you ask everybody to put everything in one bin, you'll find nappy, you'll find everything else in there. So actually, if you measure it at the end of the recycling process, it's normally about 10% plus lower than the input. But you know, it's a big question on how accurately places are doing that.
I didn't understand what you said about glass.
So our glass, no, sorry. So our glass stays in big chunks, yeah? So when it goes back to a glass reprocessor who's melting it down, they're able to melt it down and turn it back into glass. So kind of like a closed loop, because we're putting it in a box, we're keeping it separate from other materials, and it's not getting crushed up. Not in Somerset, but in some other counties, you put all your recycling in one bin. It's called a commingled system. So everything's mixed together, and then it has to go through an industrial process to separate it out, so that then the metal can be separated from the card, from the glass. Through that process, the glass gets ground up, and then it cannot be used for remelt to go back into a glass bottle. So it's one of the reasons why, if the government do bring in a deposit return scheme, they won't be including glass in it, because the way that scheme would work in the UK, or the industry is saying, is that the glass would get ground up. So the glass, reprocessors, threw their hands up in horror and said, we're going backwards if we do that. We'll have less of a circular system than we do now. So recycle more, I won't dwell on, because obviously you know what it was, but plastic pots, tubs and trays. Food and drink cartons, so again, they're I used to call them evil. They're not evil, because they do have environmental advantages. They preserve the product in them for a long time. That's a good thing. The carbon embodied in that product is significant, so you've got to take that into account. They're very lightweight compared to some other forms of packaging, so transport emissions. They absolutely do have environmental advantages in that sense, but they are a laminate of cardboard, metal and plastic. Anytime you've kind of squished materials like that together, it becomes very hard to squish them out. The carton industry do subsidise one factory up north, which is where ours go to, so that is good, and they do pull them out as best they can, but it is not perfect, and sometimes elements of it, aren't getting to the best home. So from a recycling perspective, they're not a great material, and you can talk about your Pringles, and there are lots of other ones like that. Basically anything that squishes together lots of different materials is a nightmare in terms of recyclability. Having 15 different types of plastic that we all just call plastic but are entirely chemically different, nightmare for a recycling system. Having a bio-based plastic that looks exactly like a plastic but is completely chemically different and needs to go through a completely different process, but is really hard for a human or a machine to distinguish, absolute nightmare for a recycling system. So-called compostable packaging that, because there aren't in that tight regulation on what you can say is compostable. If any of you have tried to put one of them in your home composting, you'll realise why they say in small print, suitable for industrial composting only. So, yeah.
Can I ask you something then?
Yeah.
If you get this compostable plastic, will that go in the curbside caddy? Will that work in there?
No. Anything kind of bio-based, anything that says it's compostable or a bioplastic, for us, unfortunately, it's just rubbish. We have no means to distinguish it from the other types of plastic.
So that's different
and
from green caddy bags.
Yeah, so therefore, again, they're a compromise. So yeah, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have anything, or people would line it with newspaper, and it would all go through the anaerobic. So we've got an anaerobic digester just outside Bridgewater, which is where all of your food waste from around the county goes, burping bacteria, as we say to the kids. It's basically, but it's anaerobic. Yeah, so it's producing gas, which is then turned into electricity, and a compost-like material. It's not compost because there's been food products in there, so there's a whole raft of legislation which makes it a challenging material to use. But its core thing it's creating is that energy. But yeah, it's another example of the compromise. There's the yuck factor. That is the reason why a lot of people don't do food waste. So you've got to give them something simple. So
But newspaper's okay.
Newspaper's fine, but lots of people won't like that because actually, if it gets wet in there, it can be a bit horrible when you're putting it out. But lots of people will find their own way of doing that and make it work. Again, one of the things that may come through in future national legislation is we may have to provide compostable liners free to everybody. We've always taken the view that that wasn't it when we've trialled it, but it doesn't deliver good value for money for us. But we will see, and there are very different views because effectively we're still trying to claw those compostable bags out, and there are different types of AD systems. Some of them cope better with different levels of compostable bags in them. So it's a compromise, if I'm honest, rather than a perfect solution.
Would it not make financial sense just to give everybody a free Dalek home composter if they've got a garden, so that they can just do the compost themselves? You get good earth out of it. It's a valuable resource.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably more compost bins in gardens that haven't got any compost in than there are ones that are used, I think. So we through COVID, partly as a response to kind of challenges with delivering services, we added an extra subsidy on. So if you go through our website, you can get a very subsidised compost waste bin. But yeah, it's hard for us to justify the financial return of that. We can't make that business case that you're talking about stack up, but we do try and subsidise them to encourage people to do it. We did try and do a trial with a village where we had the idea that actually what you want is the people who can compost and know how to compost support the people who can't. And so the village parish council bought a whole load of compost bins, and the idea was they were going to connect those people so you could then have a free one, but also be able to pick up the phone to somebody who knew how to compost. Because I remember when I first did it, I didn't produce anything for a couple of years. It's not worked perfectly, kind of COVID got in the way of volunteers to do that, etc. But still, it's those kind of ideas we're still keen to explore, how we can work with parish councils, how we can tap it, because we haven't got the resource to be out there anymore being a compost expert, but nor are we best placed to. I think people in communities are best placed to do that. But if we can work together with our subsidy, that kind of thing.
Hi, there are some places around here that do communal composting. So, for example, Wellows, nearest to here, which seems to work quite well, and they produce a lot of compost which they bag up and sell. Yeah,
that's super. Yeah.
So, any support for initiatives like that?
Yeah. We do have a small fund, but which we kind of created. The idea is our contractor contributes 50% into it as well, which is what we use to subsidise things like Schools Against Waste. But it is quite small, so we have to be quite mean. It's quite tight on who we give funding to. One of the things we are doing is working on a recycling A to Z. So we were talking about medical blister packs before and asthma inhalers. Well, we don't take them to curbside. Quite frankly, we never will, otherwise our recycling truck could be 3 miles long, wouldn't it, for all the different things. But there are lots of places that do. What's challenging is that they kind of come and they go, don't they? Does everybody remember when all the garden centres were doing plant pot recycling, and now hardly any of them do because it's really hard, and they were just left with a mountain and had to send them with rubbish, quite frankly. So the idea is, have that guide so that people can look in their area and their material on a map and find a place. So hopefully it will pick up those kind of things as well. I'll take that one back actually and make sure it is picking up that kind of stuff.
Something else, which is, I know that neighbours of mine had difficulty with the bin collectors when they didn't use plastic containers for the food waste and trying to use newspaper.
Okay.
Presumably the guys who actually do the collections now wouldn't object to finding newspaper.
They shouldn't. It's not their training, it's not their policy, and if they did and you reported it, we would send a crew back to get it, because that's not what they are required to do. They're human beings, they're doing a hard job, do you know what I mean? And you know, I've seen some of the food waste bins and they're disgusting, do you know what I mean? And you know, that's the reality of it. And yeah.
We use newspaper and they're very good about it actually.
Well done.
Getting back to your lightweight plastic, I think I spotted in Marks and Sparks in Fruit that they've got a collection point there. Well, what are they doing with it that you can't do with it?
I don't know for certain. There's articles you can find online, you know, about people putting trackers in some of those plastic and following. I think it was Tesco's rather than Marks and Spencer's. And you know, and let's say some non-desirable things happen to their plastic at the end. I do know that Marks and Spencer's worked with a company that used to be based in Frome, but I don't think it is anymore, Stormboard. So they were compacting some of those things. They still exist, they're just not based around here, is my understanding. So they were compacting that, creating a board, which was then, they were selling it for various different purposes. Farmers were using it to, you know, there's walls in cattle sheds, and Marks and Spencer's were using it to make some furniture. Effectively, they are subsidising it. They are, you know, they will be finding someone or different places to take that material. One hopes it's going to a lovely place like Stormboard is doing something good. One fears what they don't do is be transparent about what's happening to it. That's why I can't tell you, and that's why it's very hard for anyone to answer that question at the moment, which is why we were the first to do that end use register. You know, we're not perfect, and we're reliant on the information given to us. You know, it's not like we go off to, you know, around auditing around, you know, the whole country, and nor could you, because things are bulked up. It gets quite complicated as a system. But it's why we thought it was really important to do the best job we could at being transparent in terms of what happens to the material, because it does matter, doesn't it? Having confidence. If you put something, you go to the effort of taking it to Mars, you want to know what is happening with it, not just a bit of greenwash. And I'm not saying it is greenwash, I'm just saying there's no way of knowing, is there?
That's presumably why Sainsbury's and Frome collected flexible plastic and then stopped.
Yes.
So why?
Yeah.
Presumably they either got too much or
they couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't do anything with it. Yeah, exactly.
They were probably just to test, see how much they could get.
Yeah.
Well, this is too much.
That's the one. Exactly. It will. You know, we're back here in a few years' time. It will be the norm, I think, but we're not there yet. I'd also like to see it the norm that there's just less types of plastic, because that makes it a hell of a lot easier for everybody. And that's where you also need that binary labelling, so it's easy for everybody. Do not recycle, recycle.
Just looking at this from a bigger point of view, you know, our aim has to be to put you out of a job.
Yeah.
Recycling is better than chucking away, but it still comes with a very high carbon footprint all the way along the line. I wonder if you could just talk about methods to stop using plastics. Now, I've found getting milk delivered to the door in a glass bottle from a local farm has cut our plastics. I can't think of a better way to cut the amount of plastics we use, other than, you know, getting a veg box delivered, not going to the supermarkets. I wonder if you've got any other ideas of how we can put you out of a job.
No, you're absolutely. No, I say that myself. That is the holy grail, isn't it? It absolutely is, that we're not doing this anymore because everything's circular, because the whole system works differently. I guess it's that point you don't fix that from where I stand. If you like, you've got to fix those things in somewhere else. But yeah, absolutely. So yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle. More of a focus from us, really. Recycle more has been our big focus. Getting more of those high carbon materials out of rubbish. Stopping landfilling. We'll come back to energy from waste, I'm sure, in a bit. But yeah, next priority really is to do more on reuse. You'll know, most of you probably use Frome Recycling Centre. It's small, it's constrained. We are very money constrained. I haven't got a couple of million to make that the whiz-bang site I'd like to. We do see a future where we've got some more reuse shops. We've got one in Taunton, some more reuse shops on our sites, and more stuff on those sites just where we will never be able to fit in a reuse shop without kind of causing tailbacks through the whole return. A reuse shop, I mean, diverting stuff that people would otherwise put in there. So I'll come on to the other point in terms of reduction in a minute. But yeah, there are some places where that will never work. So yeah, we want to explore how we can just get the stuff there and centralise it, and then farm it out to organisations that want it. So yeah, doing more on reuse. That I would say, you know, once something is destined for the tip, as most people call it, it's often been left out. It's not often in the best condition. So you want to change the mindset of people. And I think that's why we got the Fixie Bus as kind of our first foray into that, which is, you know, because that is very much about it's not doing that much actual reuse. It's taking, you know, old IT and giving that a good new life. It's doing pack testing. What it's there really to do is help mainstream that idea of reuse rather than a throwaway culture. But you're absolutely right, waste reduction. And I think, but that is where then we get into some really interesting questions. So different to you, because you can get local milk in a glass bottle. Pre-COVID, when we were in the office, and this must have been like just after I started, so 4 years ago, we were like, well, we were just getting milk from Tesco's in a kind of 4 or 6 pinter. So I looked at it and we thought, oh, actually, let's just look at the life cycle analysis of getting glass milk bottle delivery versus other options. At that time, and I'm sure it's changed now, Milk and More were the only people out there that we could get a glass milk bottle delivery. They couldn't guarantee where our milk was coming from. They were the only people we could get glass milk bottle from. So we ended up realising that getting it from Gundenham dairies who were near to us in a big 4-pinter, we believed at that time had a lower kind of life cycle carbon footprint because of the because of the transport cost. So it does get complicated. So I don't know what that pathway is for us as a country, but you're right. There are just some simple steps that people can take, and it is just about thinking and recognising that we've all got quite a lot of power. There's a reason why recycled plastic has now diverged from the price for virgin plastic, and it's for the first time ever kind of higher priced than virgin plastic. It's because all of us care about it, and therefore all the brands want it, so they can write on their packaging, made with 98% recycled plastic. So, but yeah, you're right. You know, we share information on all the reuse, not reuse, the zero waste shops there are around in Somerset. I can't remember. I hope that one in there was one that opened in Shepton Mallet, wasn't there? It must have been pre-COVID, but I can't remember if that's still there. But yeah, there are quite a few of them going around, and clearly, yeah, it is better. But
bottle suppliers.
Sorry.
Do you list people, milkmen who deliver by glass?
We don't actually, but that's a good idea. So yeah, it's one I'll take back in terms of got to just get that recycling A to Z done. But you're right. Yeah, maybe something about broadening our list of reuse shops to include a wider range of waste reduced alternatives, as you say, veg boxes, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I mean, you know, one of the key things I think is about looking at how we change behaviours of ourselves and everybody. And simple things can be done on that. You were just talking about milk. You know, there are now shops that have milk that you can refill your own container.
Yeah.
Most of them will only take glass because of the sterility issues that allow you to do that. But they're becoming much more prevalent, and it's that sort of thing that we need to. I think it's one of the problems of recycling and you know, that sort of thing is that you end up embedding the behaviour in a constant cycle of doing it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can actually change people's habits, then you're starting to tackle the problem a little bit more. And I think the sort of investment in that and you know, political thoughts into that, and investment in that is going to be necessary.
No, I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Sorry, Nikki, I'm absolutely loath to stop you.
Sorry, yeah. I'm already on that page 3.
That's what I'm worried about. So it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, we're slightly run over time.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But if people have got any more questions, or if you've got, like, you know, there's 3 or 4 things that you're desperate to tell us, then please carry on a little bit, and then I'll maybe cut down Mike very slightly, who's the speaker next. although I haven't consulted with him.
No, yeah. I could talk about planning.
Stay till 6. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I'll do energy from waste in one thing. If any of you are involved in a school, a primary school as a governor or anything, encourage them to sign up for our free Schools Against Waste half-day thing. So again, in that kind of behaviour change, it's one of the ones where we have been able to find the cash to do that. Any of you involved in looking at planning applications, look at our developers guidance, especially if people are, we've got to do lots in terms of planning and making sure you build somewhere you can drive a truck around for one. But I hate communal waste facilities are awful, because you can imagine what it's like. It only takes one bad apple for it to be contaminated, if you like. So we've got some guidance now that kind of sets a standard that says everywhere should, unless you're building a massive tower block, which I can't see happening in road, should have their own separate recycling facilities, taking on your point, because we've got to stop locking in suboptimal systems, if you like, and that's what the planning system does at the moment. Take a couple of years before that's got teeth in the planning system, but as parish councils and others, you do have a voice in that. Energy from waste, so that is a couple of years ago, everything that couldn't be recycled went to landfill in Somerset. We did a big deal with Viridor to be a kind of anchor contract for the energy from waste facility they built up in Avonmouth. So now rubbish trucks go to 2 transfer stations, and then they're kind of bulked up and taken to Avonmouth. We do a couple of things at the transfer stations. We smash some big stuff up so that actually we get less and less that can't go through a landfill, and we're starting exploration with them. They're trialling it at the moment. They're breaking everything down and they're taking out some of the plastic and other materials out of that, so that hopefully that can go for recycling. So very much a trial at the moment, but okay. So energy from waste is basically a less environmentally bad, from my perspective, thing to do with rubbish. It burns it. That's about 1/3 of the plant, 2/3 of the plant, and the money goes into then cleaning up the emissions. That burning is obviously used to generate electricity. It's co-located with what is now Europe's largest plastics processing facility, so taking different types of plastic, turning them back into food grade plastic. That needs hot water in the process, so burn the waste, drives a turbine, generates electricity, loads and loads of work to clean up the emissions, vast amounts of work, more time than I've got time to talk about. Look at our kind of quarterly performance report. We try and be really transparent about the emissions from that. One of the ways you can make that process more environmentally efficient is making sure you're using all of that heat. So soon, that should be connected up to the plastics processing facility, so that some of that water that's warm but not hot enough to drive a turbine is getting used in that process. Clearly, next steps are then to encourage Viridor to find ways to make sure all of that heat is used, because that's just a waste, isn't it? Any heat that we're not used. And we are on their programme for carbon capture and storage. Reality is, that's a decade away if we're lucky. Do you know what I mean? Huge investment, emerging technology. They are kind of piloting up in Runcorn, I think, but it's still very much work in progress. So I think only a couple of % of your rubbish goes to landfill, and we're constantly trying to reduce that. Working trials on how we can do UPVC windows that currently can't be. Very hard to recycle, can't go through an energy from waste plant. So we want to get rid of landfill because that's storing up a problem for future generations. We want to minimise the amount of rubbish there is, but at the moment that is going through its least worst environmental option. We've got rubbish, we've got to do something with it. That is the least worst option we've got on the table, whilst working to reduce what's going through there and starting to explore if we can even pull stuff out of what's given to us as rubbish to find that a better home, but it's all work in progress. Does that answer the question in terms of, I know there are lots of views on energy from waste, and yeah, again, in an ideal world, it's one of those things we wouldn't need, but we do. Do you know what I mean? And let's be honest, they also have a role in energy security, because that's what they're doing, generating electricity. And you'll find some Swedish countries, they're importing waste now, because they built whole loads of them round the coast, but they don't have enough of their own rubbish to fill them. None of our rubbish goes abroad, it all goes up to Bristol, if you count that as not abroad. Alright, there's loads more, but yeah, thank you. I'll just be out there for a little bit, but if you just have a couple of minutes so I can just check my kids are okay.
First of all, thank you so much. A for coming so far. I know you've only come from another part of Somerset, but it's a long way away, so thank you for making the effort to come so far. And actually, thank you for expressing your passion, if you like, for treating our waste in the right ways. It's incredibly reassuring to know that someone like you is heading up that organisation that deals with our waste. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.